How's it going, folks? Dave Brown here with the New Populist. Thank you again for joining me. Now, I wanted to make a follow-up video to my last video on this subway chokeout situation because this situation is so polarizing and it's very hard to think clearly and really isolate things down to the facts and operate off of those. People are just so emotional. The left is calling this a lynching, which it was not. And the right thinks that this was 100% a situation where the actions were justified by this Marine, this subway rider. And I certainly lean more to the right's perspective, but not 100%. So I want to make some clarifications because we have some new information and be a little more precise in my thoughts about what should happen here. And, the first thing again is I'm coming from a legal perspective. I drop the emotion. I don't get swept up in the emotion of the left and the right and this whole game they're playing. I just look at it for what it is and try to find a perspective that is balanced and is legal based or law based, not emotion based. Second, I want to point out I have very little compassion for the person who was actually choked. And I say little, not none, because this person was mentally ill. And this is a failure on the part of our government to take care of these people who should not be on the street when they have 44 arrests and a history of violence. But they are. And they force the public to protect itself. And when that happens, things like this happen. And as far as the Marine, I feel bad for him because I don't think he was trying to kill anybody. He was doing what he thought was right. And when you watch the video, when he gets up and the guy's laying there, he has a look on his face that says, oops. I think I might have done something here that I might regret. Not regret, but he was clearly looking at this guy laying motionless going, oh crap, what just happened here? Is this going to come back and bite me in the rear end? And also we know now that it wasn't a 15-minute chokeout. So that was the initial thing people were saying. I said it. It looks like it was just a few minutes. So it wasn't a long, again, 15 minutes, quarter of an hour hold. That didn't happen. And we also need to get a full report from the coroner because the exact cause of death is extremely important, as I'll explain later. If he died because he had a heart attack while being choked, that's significant. If he died directly from being choked on the side of his neck, whether it was his windpipe being pushed where he couldn't breathe or the blood being cut off from his brain, that is also very important. So those things need to be figured out before we arrive at a final conclusion as far as what should be done here. So let's first, think about, the New York state law. And according to New York state law, a person can use physical force if they reasonably think they are being threatened and are in imminent danger of being assaulted. So you don't have to get hit first before you respond back with physical force. You just have to have the reasonable suspicion that you're about to be assaulted by somebody. And certainly in this case, this gentleman was going up and down the train car, ranting and raving and threatening to hurt people. So from that perspective, because that happened, I do think there was the right to use physical force to restrain this individual. And clearly, this is what happened here. He was restrained. Now, when can you use lethal physical force rather than just physical force? You can use lethal physical force if you feel that your life is being threatened. Now, in New York, you have a duty to retreat if you're in a public place. If you can escape that situation and be away from it, that is your requirement. There are some exceptions. If you are in your home and you can't retreat out of your home, that's a different situation. But obviously in this situation, they were trapped with this guy on a subway car with the doors closed. So you couldn't really retreat from the situation. But again, this is for lethal physical force. Now, did the guy, what he was doing, demand the use of lethal physical force? Well, he was unarmed. And if he's unarmed and he hasn't touched anybody, I do not think that rises to the standard of lethal physical force, only physical force. So now that we understand that, physical force was applied. Here's the problem. The guy died. Now, I remember I said earlier about the autopsy, why that's important. If he had a heart attack while he was being restrained, that is not the Marine applying lethal physical force. This was another factor that caused his death. Kind of like George Floyd, where he was ODing, he had heart disease and he had COVID-19 all together. And he was having breathing problems before Chauvin even put his knee on his back or his neck. So in that situation, I always thought it ridiculous that he was charged with second-degree murder when he was already seemingly having medical problems before Chauvin even, really interacted with him in that way. Again, as I said before, my problem with Chauvin was I thought at a certain point when somebody's lying motionless and they're handcuffed, you have a duty as a police officer to check on the guy and try to provide some help, which he didn't seem to do there. And that was my problem. But certainly second-degree murder. Now, again, in this case with the subway, he dies. If he died because he had his neck compressed, and that was the sole reason for why he died, and there was no other factors like drugs or heart disease, and that was it, then the Marine, that guy, did apply lethal physical force, which in this situation was not called for. And technically, that would be illegal. Now, if he did it by accident versus doing it intentionally, that's also a legal distinction here, because if it's an accident, then we have things like involuntary manslaughter. If he did it intentionally, that would be different. That's just manslaughter, or depending on a jury or DA, they could even try to say it was murder, or second-degree murder or third-degree murder, whatever the state law is. So it does matter why he died. And if he did die directly because of the actions of the Marine, that guy, then again, that might suggest to me it was illegal. And again, just because it was an accident, I'm not sure there's a legal reason for you to be able to accidentally apply lethal physical force to somebody in a situation where only physical force was necessary. And that's why he might be in trouble. And, in this situation, because the guy was crazy and he was a maniac with 44 arrests and he was a threat to society, I think we have very little compassion for him, and we don't want to see this guy get charged. But let me look at a different situation here, right? To just show you how it's a dangerous precedent for lethal physical force to be used, even if by accident. A bar. I've said before, I've worked in bars. I've been threatened a million times. I mean, it doesn't even bother me anymore. Somebody gets drunk, they get belligerent, they make threats. Happens all the time. Now, what if we said, just with physical or verbal threats of violence, you could grab someone by the neck and pull them down on the ground and apply a force that could accidentally be a lethal physical force? We would have people dropping dead every day in every bar across the entire country. That would be in my opinion, a very dangerous precedent to set, that we can jump to that level of violence just based off of verbal threats from an unarmed person. Again, I've seen it happen so many times. I'm going to kill you. I'm going to mess you up. And, the person runs their mouth and eventually they go away 99.9% of the time. But if we're saying that's enough for somebody to jump in and start grabbing someone's neck, then this person who's ranting, raving like a lunatic in front of a bar because he's drunk at 2 in the morning, that means anybody could walk up from behind him and go put him in a chokehold at RNC and drag him to the ground. I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that precedent being set for society in general. Now, of course, every state's different as far as their laws, but if that's generally acceptable, we're going to have a lot of problems in the future as far as people being choked, people accidentally dying through this sort of physical, violence. And I think that's a pretty big problem. So what I would like to see done in this case with New York, all right, don't charge the guy, but then let's have a national PSA, right? So that says, in the future, if you have a belligerent maniac just running around ranting like a lunatic, don't do the RNC. Do the full Nelson. You come up behind him like this guy did, but instead of grabbing his neck, you come up from under his arms. You do this behind his head, and his arms are in air like this, and he can't do nothing. You know why I know that? Because I've done it before on several occasions. It's very effective. And then you can wrestle the person right to the ground, lock your hands, and his arms are pinned like this. You're not on his throat or his neck here. It's fairly safe, and you can hold him down until the cops come. That's what I would recommend people do, not the RNC choke. That is always a dangerous thing when you grab the neck. And in my personal life, my interactions, I was very, very careful with that because I was always concerned about somebody accidentally dying. And if that happened, obviously you got some big legal problems laying out there in front of you. So use the full Nelson. Very good maneuver, and it's much safer than the rear naked choke. Well, those are my thoughts. Please leave a thought, something in the comments if you disagree, if you concur, because this is a really messy thing. It's complicated, it's layered, and it's very emotional and very polarizing. And I hate the fact that the left is using this for obviously political things, reasons like George Floyd, like Michael Brown, like all of them. And they're making it something that's not. Lynching. Oh my gosh, it's just ridiculous. But at the same time, again, coming from the right, we can't not be callous, but we can't just dismiss out of hand that this was 100% okay and that there's no problem here. I think it's a little more nuanced, and if we're thinking intellectual people who don't respond emotionally like the left does, we need to recognize those nuances and vocalize it. And because it also makes us look better. So it's not like we're just we're the right, so we don't care if this black guy dies. We can show that we're thinking our way through this, and we have compassion for everybody involved, and we want a better way in the future. I think there's a value in showing that more intellectual, more thinking side rather than combat the left with their own emotional outburst. And then we have, again, this polarized situation where nothing constructive gets done, and that is the problem. Well, that's it for now. If you are new to my channel, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.